You talked basically about growth with responsibility and trying to get the with responsibility off the agenda. And it was something that was alluded to in the film as well, whereby in the 70s that was the agenda was just growth. And so isn't it in a way kind of coming full circle? And that's why we are where we are today with the sort of focus on pro-poor growth and growth with responsibility and however you want to phrase it. And so isn't it kind of going back on itself, because basically in the 70s they were saying that wasn't working, trickle-down effects weren't sort of impacting the poorest in society, so how do we then go backwards in a sense?
I suppose the way I see it is that you've had two problems, because in the 60s and through part of the 70s, it's certainly right that you had belief in growth, but I think two things happened to derail that. Partly people's horizons became narrowed. So it was in the 70s when people really started talking about basic needs and let's lower those horizons. So there was a kind of counterattack against the idea of growth. And secondly, growth wasn't delivered. I mean, Africa in the 80s and through much of the 90s had a terrible time when rather than growing, the economy shrunk, which caused complete and utter devastation, very different from the situation today. So growth wasn't delivered, which of course does help to breed a certain amount of cynicism about growth and what can be achieved by it. So rather than going back, I mean, what I would say is the first thing we need to do is to try to rehabilitate growth and say growth and development is really important. And once we've done that, and obviously that's not an easy thing to do at all, try to make sure that it's also delivered. That's the second part of the process, but we're not there at the moment. It's more people think growth itself is a problem. They're not even, they see striving to achieve that, or at least people in the West see striving to achieve growth as a problem.
I'm thinking about Live Aid, dare I say it, and those irritating Make Poverty History wristbands. And so I'm just wondering how we can sort of challenge that real lifestyle choice that this seems to have become, and that does worry me. The other very quick question, just to take a little measure of hypocrisy of this, does anybody know how much the UK government itself is in debt at the moment, if it is?
What do we do about the wristband people? I mean, to put it very crudely, about all these people in the West who say, oh, I'm going to save Africa because I'm holding a wristband or wearing a wristband or whatever, taking some other kind of, making a gesture. I think first of all we should probably ridicule them and say this is utterly ridiculous. You know, you're just, I won't be rude because it's on film, but you're just a self-indulgent, stupid person to believe that somehow you're helping Africa by wearing a white wristband. This is just utterly absurd. And so really try and cut through the moralism of that and also start talking about Africa. I think it was Phil at the beginning who made the point that all these kind of campaigns like Live Aid and Live Aid and so on, they actually really hardly ever talk about Africa itself, what's happening in Africa, African people. It's all kind of just looking on high as Africans, as victims. Africans are either victims or maybe they're committing genocide in different regions, but that's the way they see Africa. Whereas I think we should really start talking about what's really happening in Africa, or what the real economic problems are, and how Africans can begin to overcome those problems, rather than just kind of moralising and making ridiculous gestures.
Just on the other specific question about UK government debt, I think the UK government debt is well over $1 trillion, but it's not a problem at all. That level of borrowing isn't a problem. And although Gordon Brown always seems to redefine his sense of what's responsible for the UK economy, he's in charge of doing that. He can say this level of debt's fine because I've tweaked the measurements this year. But he's in charge of doing that because he's the Chancellor at the moment. The Ghanaian government isn't in charge of doing that for themselves. They can't say for themselves what is a responsible level of borrowing for their economy. They get told what it is. And that's the kind of patronising and ultimately dangerous attitude that comes from NGOs and donor countries, putting at risk the possibilities that Ghana has for the future. And the Ghanaian government has got very little wiggle room to do anything about it.
Why is it in the interest of the GA or the West to keep Africa in a sort of stagnant state? Why do we want to keep them there?
I don't think there is any kind of practical interest in terms of they're kind of afraid of African competition, or they want to keep Africa poor in any kind of conscious strategic sense. But I think it should reflect, it's a broader kind of problem of a lack of ambition and a lack of vision. But also, because it's not the Africans setting the agenda, then it means that, their kind of aspirations can never come on. So because the G8 can call the shots, then they can also put forward their own kind of preoccupations and their own concerns. When Oxfam representatives or Western representatives or World Bank representatives or whoever it might be, when they begin to sit on policy committees in Tanzania or in Ghana or in Nigeria, and they begin to determine and regulate those countries' public spending, then they're obviously having concrete effects on people's lives. But they're not the ones who are accountable to people in those countries. The people who are accountable are African politicians, Ghanaian or Tanzanian, whoever. So effectively you have Western institutions and Western leaders exercising power, but without any responsibility and without any accountability, because they're not beholden in any meaningful way to African populations.
I think it's simply about fear of over there. We can't trust these people. What happens if it gets out of our control? There's a real insecurity over here about what happens in that dark continent as they see it, and they just don't want to let it off the leash. And this is all about leashes. For the past 30 years or more, money has been lent to developing countries. It's been reorganised for the 80s and 90s, and finally it's been relieved and cancelled. And at each stage there were strings attached saying what you can and can't do, how you should and shouldn't develop your economies or not, or how you should run your services. And all the time it's all about, and specifically now with the debt cancellation, it's about stopping any possibility of change. And it's that fear of something happening. And so that's why I think the statistics of the debt relief are important, not because it's a technical accounting game that's going on, but the real moralism that underlies it about this is a problem if these people can do what they like.
I would say, to close, I would say then, just because, international politics and development isn't understood in the old terms of race and empire and so on, that doesn't mean that these new ideas that are kind of so fashionable at the moment should just be taken at face value. The kind of the new forms of authority and the new ways in which people in the developing world are patronised takes a very different form from what it did in the past. And it's incumbent on people who are genuinely concerned about development to challenge that and to expose it, which I think the film is a showcase of how to do that.
We've heard many interesting and insightful views, and I hope we've sparked some debate. If you'd like to watch the documentary featured, Damned by Debt Relief, check out our website, www.worldwrite.org.uk. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Annabelle Cooper, and you've been watching the WORLDwrite Newsreel.